Most people know exactly one thing about Fukushima. They know the wave. They know the reactors. They know that somewhere on the eastern coast of Japan, there is a place that has stopped being a place and become an event instead. And they are not wrong. On the 11th of March, 2011, at 46 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, the seafloor off the Tohoku coast moved. What followed killed 19,782 people. 2,550 of them have never been found. So the picture in your head is not a lie. It is just very small. Fukushima is a prefecture. It is the third largest in Japan, 13,700 square kilometers of mountain and basin and coastline, and roughly 1.7 million people live in it right now. Today, this morning. In 2011, 12% of that land was placed under evacuation orders. Today, the figure is 2.2%. Which means that 97.8% of Fukushima never stopped. The trains run, the schools fill. There is a castle town in the western mountains where the swordsmiths still work, and a 1,000-year-old cherry tree that flowered again this spring, and a sake industry that took the most gold medals at Japan's National New Sake Awards 9 years in a row. But there is that other 2.2%. And inside it, along a stretch of the Pacific coast, about the length of a morning's drive, there are towns that have been standing empty for 15 years. Not sealed, not glowing, not, in most cases, even particularly radioactive anymore, just empty. In the town of Futaba, the official register lists 5,300 residents. The town keeps the list carefully. Every name, every household, every family that ever lived there. The number of people who actually sleep in Futaba tonight is about 180. The evacuation order was lifted in 2022. The gates are open. The station is running. Outside the Memorial Museum, a sign reports the local radiation level in microsieverts per hour, and the number on it is 0.045. That is lower than the dose you absorb sitting in the window seat of a transatlantic flight. The town is not dangerous. The town is simply no longer a town. So the question is not the one everyone asks. It is not whether the radiation is safe. That question has been measured and argued and measured again for 15 years. The question is, what actually empties a place, and how long a community can hold its breath before it stops being one? To understand what happened to those towns, you have to start somewhere else entirely. 2 hours west, over the mountains, in a Fukushima that has almost nothing to do with 2011, and never did. The Aizu Basin sits in the western third of the prefecture, ringed by peaks that catch the snow coming off the Sea of Japan and hold it. Some winters, the drifts reach the second floor. The isolation is the point. For most of recorded Japanese history, this valley was hard to reach and harder to leave, and what grew inside it grew undisturbed. At the center of it stands Tsurugajo.
The castle has been rebuilt more than once.
The current keep dates from 1965, faithful to the original down to the red tiles on the roof, which are unusual in Japan and unmistakable from a distance. White plaster walls, dark timber, a moat that still holds carp. What matters is not the building, it is what happened here in the autumn of 1868. The Boshin War was the end of the samurai. The imperial forces were modernizing, and the Aizu domain, loyal to the collapsing shogunate, refused to yield. The siege of Tsurugajo lasted a month. More than 1,000 defenders died inside these walls. On a hillside about 3 kilometers away, a company of teenage soldiers called the Byakutai, the White Tiger Force, looked back toward the town and saw smoke rising from the castle district. They concluded the castle had fallen and that their lord was dead. Both conclusions were wrong. The castle was still holding. The smoke was from the town. 19 of them took their own lives on that hillside. The youngest was 16. Their graves are up there now, in a row, under the cedars. People still leave incense. On the same hill stands one of the most quietly astonishing buildings in Japan, and almost nobody outside the country has heard of it. Sasaedo was built in 1796. It is a wooden hexagonal tower, about 16 meters high, and inside it there is a double helix. 2 separate spiral ramps, one ascending and one descending, wound around each other so that a pilgrim climbing to the top never passes a single person coming down. You enter, you rise, you cross at the summit, you descend by a different path, and you emerge without having retraced one step. It was built with no nails. Japanese carpentry of that period joined timber to timber by cutting the wood so precisely that it locked. The double helix, as an architectural form, would not appear in the West for decades. The monks who designed it were not thinking about geometry. They were thinking about a pilgrimage route that took months and compressing it into a single building so that the old and the poor could complete it in an afternoon. The spiral is a shortcut to enlightenment. It happens to also be a structural marvel. 20 minutes from the hill, the smell of the town changes. Aizu Wakamatsu is a sake town. It has the 2 things sake needs and cannot fake: rice, grown in the basin's heavy soil, and water filtered down through volcanic rock from the snowfields above. The Suehiro Brewery has been working since 1850. The buildings are turn of the century, dark cedar and white plaster, and the tour is free and unbooked. You walk past the vats, and the air is thick and sweetly sour with fermenting koji mold, which is the organism that does the actual work. Rice has starch, not sugar. Yeast cannot eat starch. So the brewer grows a mold across the steamed grain. The mold breaks the starch into sugar, and the yeast follows behind, converting sugar into alcohol. The 2 processes run at the same time in the same tank, which is a thing almost no other alcohol on Earth does. Fukushima's brewers won more gold medals than any other prefecture at Japan's annual New Sake Awards for 9 consecutive years, from 2013 through to 2022. Then they did it again in 2025. Consider when that streak started, 2 years after the accident. At the exact moment, the word Fukushima was, for most of the planet, a warning label. They did not win those medals in spite of the timing. They won them because a prefecture-wide technical school for brewers had been quietly training a generation of masters for years, and that generation happened to come of age precisely when their name was worth nothing. An hour south of the castle, the road narrows and climbs, and then drops into a valley where the 20th century was quietly declined. Ochijuku is a post town. In the Edo period, the road from Aizu to the capital at Edo ran through here, and travelers on foot needed somewhere to sleep every 15 or 20 kilometers. Ochijuku was one of those stops. It was founded around 1640. There is one street. It is earth, not asphalt. On either side stand rows of houses with steep thatched roofs a meter thick in places, and there are no power lines anywhere. The cables were buried. The residents voted for it. That decision was made in the 1970s, when the village was dying, and the obvious move was to modernize. They went the other way. They agreed collectively not to sell the houses, not to alter the facades, and not to let a single pole go up. Roughly 50 households signed onto a charter binding their own property rights. Today, the houses are sober restaurants and craft shops, and the local dish is a bowl of buckwheat noodles served with a whole raw spring onion instead of chopsticks. You use the onion as a scoop. You also bite it. It is not a gimmick that survived. It is a gimmick that was invented and then survived, which is arguably harder. The village is at its strangest in February, under 2 meters of snow, when they carve lanterns out of the drifts and carry burning torches down the single street. North of the basin, the ground remembers a different kind of violence. Mount Bandai is a stratovolcano, 1,819 meters high, and on the 15th of July, 1888, its northern face collapsed. Not an eruption in the way people picture eruptions. Steam. Groundwater met rising heat, flashed to vapor, and blew the flank of the mountains sideways. Around a cubic kilometer and a half of rock moved at once. The debris avalanche buried villages and killed roughly 470 people. And then it did something stranger. It dammed the rivers. Every valley on the northern slope was blocked at its mouth. The water backed up behind the rubble. Within a few years, there were more than 300 new lakes and ponds where there had been forest. The most famous of them are called Goshikinuma, the 5 colored marshes, though there are far more than 5. Walk the trail between them, and the water changes color pond by pond. Cobalt, jade, a pale, milky turquoise, a dull copper. The colors are not reflections of the sky. Each pond drains a different mineral seam left by the collapse, and each carries a different suspension of iron, aluminium, and silica. 2 ponds, 50 meters apart, fed by different seeps, will be different colors on the same overcast afternoon. In some of them, the mineral load is high enough that almost nothing lives. 138 years is nothing to a mountain. To a landscape, it is enough time to become the reason people visit. Further east, in the town of Miharu, there is a tree. The Miharu Takizakura is a weeping Higan cherry, and it is somewhere over 1,000 years old. The name means waterfall cherry, and in the second half of April, it earns it. The branches fall outward and downward in 4 directions, 13 meters of spread, and when the blossom opens, the whole crown becomes a pale pink cascade that reaches almost to the ground. It is one of the 3 great cherry trees of Japan and a designated national natural monument. It has been standing since before the samurai class existed. It was already ancient when the Byakutai died. It was 300 years old when the Soma clan arrived on the coast. The trunk is now held up with timber props and steel bracing, and a team of arborists monitors it constantly. Every year, a slightly higher proportion of the tree is being kept alive by people rather than by itself. Every year, it flowers anyway. There is a version of this documentary that stays here, in the West, in the mountains and the castle town and the sake and the thatch. It would be an honest film. Everything in it is true, and nearly none of it has anything to do with 2011.
But you did not click for the West.
So we cross the prefecture, east through the Nakadori, the central corridor where the bullet train runs and the peach orchards start. Fukushima grows about a fifth of Japan's peaches. In August, the roadside stands are stacked with them. And then the land drops again toward the sea, and you enter the Hamadori, the coastal strip, the flattest, mildest, most temperate part of the prefecture. Fishing villages, rice terraces, a long, shallow shoreline facing the Pacific. This is the 2.2%. The first thing you notice is not ruin, it is neatness. The fields on either side of Route 6 are not overgrown wreckage. They are stripped. In 2014, the government began removing the top 5 centimeters of soil from farmland, gardens, verges, roadsides, and schoolyards across the affected region because cesium binds tightly to clay particles and stays in the surface layer. Scrape off the surface, and you take most of the contamination with it. It worked. Radiation levels in inhabited areas dropped by around 60%. It also produced 14 million cubic meters of radioactive soil. You see it before anyone explains it. Black bags, large industrial 1 cubic meter each, stacked in grids in the fields, sometimes 8 or 10 high, covered in green sheeting. Field after field of them. From the road, it looks like an agricultural product waiting for a truck. Under Japanese law, all of that soil must be removed from Fukushima prefecture entirely and placed in a permanent site somewhere else by the year 2045. No such site exists. No prefecture has volunteered. And in among the bags, in the ditches and the abandoned verges and the ground that no machine has touched, there is a butterfly. The pale grass blue is the most common butterfly in Japan. It is small, roughly the size of a thumbnail, and the male's upper wing is a dusty violet blue that only shows in direct light. It lives its entire life within a meter or so of the ground because it feeds on a single, low-growing weed called creeping wood sorrel and never needs to go higher. That habit made it, entirely by accident, the most useful animal in Fukushima. Cesium settled onto the surface. The butterfly lives on the surface. It eats one plant, that plant grows in the contaminated layer, and the insect completes a generation in about a month. 6 or 7 generations a year. A team from the University of the Ryukyus began collecting them in May of 2011, 2 months after the accident, and has been collecting them ever since. The first generation showed mild abnormalities, wings slightly undersized, eye spots misplaced. The generations that followed were worse, and the offspring reared in the laboratory from contaminated parents were worse again. Growth failure, death at the larval stage. The abnormality rate peaked in May of 2012. Then it fell. By 2016, the rate at the monitored sites had come back down to the level of uncontaminated parts of Japan. And when researchers took butterflies descended from the contaminated populations and exposed them again, those lineages proved measurably more resistant than butterflies from clean ground. 15 years is a long time in a human life. It is a fraction of a career. It is a childhood. For this butterfly, 15 years is about 100 generations. Enough time for a population to be damaged, to be culled, and to change. "60 kilometers northwest of the plant, well outside every circle anyone drew on a map in the first week, there is a village called Iitate. It was evacuated because of the weather. In the days after the accident, the wind turned inland, and a cold front came through, and it snowed. Snow strips particles out of the air far more efficiently than rain does, and it deposits them without runoff. The plume tracked northwest, met the front over the Abukuma highlands, and fell out onto Iitate's forests and pastures.
The village had nothing to do with the nuclear industry.
It had no plant, no jobs at the plant, no vote inviting anyone in. It was a cattle and vegetable village of about 6,000 people that had spent the previous decade marketing itself on the slogan of unhurried living. It was ordered out at the end of April, 7 weeks after the accident, by which point everyone had already been living there for 7 weeks. The evacuation orders over most of Iitate were lifted in 2017. The butterfly survey plots there are still monitored, and the abnormality rate there behaved differently from the coastal sites. It fell through the middle of the decade, and then, in 2021, it went back up. Nobody has fully explained why. Three-quarters of the exclusion zone is forest. That is the fact that governs everything else, and it is the one that gets left out. The coast is flat, but a few kilometers inland, the Abukuma highlands begin, and they are steep, wooded, and continuous. Forest cannot be decontaminated. You can scrape a rice field. You cannot scrape a mountainside without destroying the mountainside, and the cesium in a forest does not sit still. It cycles. It moves from leaf litter into fungi, from fungi into soil, from soil into roots, and back up into new leaves. And every autumn, the leaves fall, and the cycle starts again, which is why the wild mushrooms cannot be eaten. Fungi concentrate cesium efficiently, which is exactly why they are useless as food and useful as monitors. The mountain vegetables that people here had gathered every spring for centuries are off the menu indefinitely in a landscape that is otherwise open. And the boar cannot be eaten either, which is unfortunate because there are a great many boar. In 2016, a team from the University of Georgia, working with Fukushima University, set out motion-triggered cameras at 106 sites across 3 zones: the uninhabited zone, the restricted intermediate zone, and the outer areas where people still lived. They left them for 120 days and collected 267,000 photographs. 20 species: Japanese hare, green pheasant, red fox, Japanese marten, masked palm civet, raccoon dog, macaque, and boar. 46,000 images of boar, 26,000 of them from the uninhabited zone, against roughly 7,000 from the inhabited land, in the same period with the same equipment. The wild boar of Japan is not a large animal by European standards. An adult male runs to about 100 kilos. It is intelligent, omnivorous, and reproductively relentless. A sow can raise 2 litters in a good year, and an abandoned rice paddy is a very good year. They did not simply expand into the fields, they moved indoors. Returning residents opened houses that had been sealed for 6 or 7 years and found the floors torn up, the tatami shredded, and boar living in the front rooms. In the yards, the ground was churned. Graves were dug open. The government hired hunters to cull them before reopening the towns. The hunters did the work. The meat could not be sold because cesium concentrates in muscle tissue, and the animals eat mushrooms and roots straight out of the forest floor. So the carcasses were disposed of as waste. The boar are the clearest evidence of the film's actual argument. Radiation did not decide what lived here. The absence of people did. The cameras caught something else too, and it is a single frame. A Japanese macaque, an adult female, walking a forest track. On her back, gripping the fur, an infant. Macaques are the northernmost non-human primate on Earth. They live further into the cold than any monkey has any business living, and they have been in these mountains far longer than the towns have. Before the accident, they were a nuisance species on the edge of the zone. Raiders of gardens and orchards, chased off by farmers who had known their grandmother's troop. The infant on that mother's back is the part that matters. A camera can show you that an animal is present. It cannot tell you whether the animal is merely surviving there, drifting in from cleaner ground, using the empty space, and dying young. A baby means a population. It means the thing has completed a cycle. It means whatever is happening in that forest, it is not an ending. Which brings us north, up the coast, to a town where a different kind of continuity is being fought for by people rather than by chance. Minami-Soma sits above the northern edge of the zone. Its southern district, Odaka, was evacuated entirely and did not reopen until 2016. For more than 1,000 years, this stretch of coast has held a festival called the Soma no Maui. It began, by tradition, around the year 940 with a warlord named Taira no Masakado, who released horses onto the plain and had his cavalry chase them down as training. The Soma clan, who claimed descent from him, carried it forward. It became less a drill and more a rite, offered to the shrines of the domain, and it has been running here continuously since 1323. The current supreme commander of the festival is a direct descendant of the founding line, the 42nd generation. On the main day, several hundred riders in full lacquered armor parade through the streets and out onto an open field called Hibarigahara. The armor is not reproduction. Families keep their own suits and their own banners, passed down and repaired and passed down again, and the crest on your back is the crest your family carried. There is an armored horse race, and then there is the flag catch. Sacred banners are fired into the sky on rockets. Several hundred riders wait below. As the flags come down, the field converges on them at a full gallop, hundreds of horses in armor crossing the same ground toward the same falling point of cloth. In 2011, the horses were gone. They had been evacuated, sent north to Hokkaido and south to Chiba because the pasture was contaminated and nobody knew what the feed would do. Their riders were in shelters. The coast in front of the festival ground had been erased by the water. Roughly half of all the deaths in Fukushima prefecture that day came from this stretch of the Hamadori. 4 months later, the festival was held. 82 horses, a fragment of the usual 600. They rode part of one route in the summer of the same year that had taken their homes, and then they stopped and went back to the shelters. It has been held every year since. By 2019, the number was back near 400. What that means practically is that every year, several hundred people who no longer live in these towns have to travel back to them, from Fukushima City, from Koriyama, from Tokyo in some cases. They come back, they put on their family's armor, they ride, and then they leave again. The festival now runs in late May instead of late July, moved to spare the horses the worst of the heat. It is one of very few places left in Japan where horses are still part of ordinary life. And it is the reason a town with a fraction of its population still assembles once a year at full strength. In January of 2026, the town of Okuma held its coming-of-age ceremony in an auditorium in Odaka. Coming-of-Age Day is a national fixture in Japan. Every municipality gathers the young adults who turned 20 in the past year, and they come home in suits and formal kimono, and they see the people they went to primary school with. By the town register, Okuma should have had 135 young adults that year. 10 came.
None of them live in Okuma.
They traveled long distances to be there. Their family registry says Okuma, and so they are, officially, from a place they have no memory of. One of them, a sociology student named Takumi Sakamoto, said plainly that he did not recognize a single person in the room. He had never seen any of them before. The others said the same. They were 4 or 5 years old in 2011. That is what 15 years does that radiation cannot. It does not poison a town, it ages one out. The children who would have grown up together grew up apart in Saitama and Koriyama and Tokyo, and the shared childhood that a hometown is actually made of never happened. Sakamoto plans to write his thesis on it. South from Odaka, the road runs down toward Namie. 300 meters from the water, on flat ground that used to be a fishing district called Ukeido, there is a 2-story concrete school building with its front wall missing. Ukeido Elementary was founded in 1873 and rebuilt in 1998. The architects made it about the sea because the district was about the sea. One end has an observation tower shaped like a sail. The gymnasium is shaped like a hull. The tiles in the entrance hall are decorated with the fish the village lived on. On the 11th of March 2011, at 46 minutes past 2, there were 82 children in that building. The earthquake lasted several minutes. When it stopped, the tsunami warning came over the radio. The staff had a written evacuation protocol. The protocol said to hold the children at the school and release them to their parents. They did not follow it. They took the 82 children out of the building on foot and moved them toward Mount Ohira, a hill about 1.5 kilometers inland. Partway there, the group came to a decision point, and by the account that has come down, it was a child who knew the ground best who indicated the route up. They followed him. All 82 children and every member of staff were on the hillside when the water came in, roughly 40 minutes after the shaking stopped. It reached 10 centimeters above the second floor of the school. In the Ukeido district that afternoon, more than 120 people died. 402 houses were destroyed. Locals call the school the Miracle School, and it is, but the miracle was administrative disobedience by a handful of teachers who decided that a written procedure was going to kill their students. The next day, the evacuation order came for Namie, and everything stopped. The rescue teams could not go in. The bodies in the Hokkaido district were left where the water had put them, in the open for weeks, because the ground they lay on was inside the radiation zone. Families knew roughly where their dead were and were not permitted to go and get them. That is the sentence that never makes it into the international coverage. Not the reactors, not the plume. That the sea took 120 people in this village and the plant then made it illegal to bring them home. The school opened to the public as a memorial in 2021. The first floor is left as the water left it, walls stripped back to the steel, furniture folded into corners, a heavy steel safe from the principal's office lying on its back where the force of the water threw it across the room. In 2016, they opened that safe and found the documents inside intact. The clocks all show the same time because they were wired to a single controller downstairs. The second floor, where the water stopped, is intact. The classrooms up there are unremarkable. Desks, boards, coat hooks. That is what makes them difficult. Namie was also, for 300 years, a pottery town. Obori somayaki was first made here in the 1690s, when a member of the Hangai family found good clay in the Obori district. It has 3 signature techniques: an iron-rich glaze that crackles as it cools into a fine blue web, a running horse painted on the surface, taken from the crest of the Soma clan, drawn always in the same stroke order, and a double-walled construction in which the inner and outer vessels are thrown separately and joined before firing, so the cup holds heat and does not burn the hand. No other pottery tradition in Japan uses that last technique. Before 2011, there were over 100 kilns working in the Obori district. The earthquake destroyed the climbing kilns outright. The evacuation order finished the job. Today, the number of active kilns is around 10, and most of them are not in Namie. They are in Fukushima City, in rented workshops, in industrial units, wherever the potters ended up. Teishin Hangai is the 16th master of the Hangai kiln, a direct descendant of the man who found the clay. He is still working. He is not working at home. The crackle happens as the piece cools. You can hear it, a high, thin, metallic sound, like something very small being struck over and over as the glaze contracts faster than the clay beneath it. In the hills above the town, inside the restricted zone, there is a house with a sagging floor and holes in the roof where the tiles came off. A man named Sakai Kato lives in it. Technically, he is permitted to visit and not to sleep there. He sleeps there. Kato ran a small construction business before the accident. In the weeks afterward, he was working on demolition, opening up houses that had been evacuated, and he kept finding pets that had been left behind. People had expected to be gone for a few days. They had put out food for a few days. He stopped leaving. He has buried 23 cats in his garden. He has cared for around 41 more in his house and in an outbuilding, including 2 with feline leukemia that he keeps with him. There is no running water. He fills bottles from a mountain spring and drives to public toilets. He spends roughly $7,000 a month on the animals. Part of that goes on dog food, which he puts out at sunset for the wild boar that come down to the house. The same boar that dig up the graves in his garden. In February of 2021, he was arrested on suspicion of releasing a boar from one of the government's traps. When asked why he will not leave, he does not talk about the cats first. He says he likes living in these mountains. The land has been in his family for 3 generations. 20 kilometers south, past the plant, there is a town called Tomioka and a farmer named Naoto Matsumura. Matsumura left with everyone else. He tried to stay with relatives further inland and was turned away because they were afraid of what he might be carrying. He had nowhere to go that would take him. So he went back. What he found in Tomioka is the part he still describes in the same flat way. Cattle tied in barns. More than 1,000 of them in this town alone, still tethered because nobody had been permitted back to release them. He describes the sound of the flies. He describes the smell and how it stayed on clothing. He has said that after everything decayed down to bone, it became easier to look at. He fed what was still alive: dogs, cats, cattle, and eventually an ostrich that had come from somewhere nobody could account for. Japanese researchers have described him as the most irradiated man in the country. He has been told the likely consequences will take 30 or 40 years to appear, and that at his age, this is not the most pressing arithmetic in his life. He funds the feeding through donations. For years, he ran a blog off solar power without mains electricity or running water. Tomioka has a road called Sakura Dori. It runs about 2.5 kilometers, and it is lined on both sides with more than 300 cherry trees whose branches meet overhead. In the first week of April, it becomes a tunnel. People used to drive it slowly with the windows down. For 6 years, nobody saw it. The evacuation order over central Tomioka was not lifted until 2017. The trees flowered every spring into an empty road. The town's registered population is around 11,500. The number of people actually living there is roughly 2,300. That is about 1 in 5. And Tomioka is one of the more successful returns. Okuma is where the plant sits. Units 1 through 4 stood on the Okuma side of the site boundary. In 2010, the town had 11,500 people. It was evacuated completely, and residents were allowed back only in daylight hours from 2013. Parts of the town reopened in 2019. The registered population is about 10,000. The number actually resident is in the hundreds. Okuma also holds the interim storage facility, 16 square kilometers of land, bought or leased from the people who used to farm it, now given over to sorting, measuring, and stacking the 14 million cubic meters of soil that came off the fields. Interim is the operative word. It is a legal commitment that this is temporary. It has a deadline of 2045 and no destination. It is worth saying out loud what Okuma and Futaba agreed to and when. In the 1870s, this coast was coal country. The Joban coalfield ran under the Hamadori, and for most of a century, it was the reason the region had wages at all. By the late 1950s, the seams were failing and the mines were closing, and Fukushima was falling behind the rest of a country that was in the middle of the fastest economic expansion in its history. The prefecture went looking for something to replace it. In the autumn of 1961, the town councils of Futaba and Okuma each voted to invite the Tokyo Electric Power Company to build a nuclear power station on the boundary between them. Both votes were unanimous. The electricity generated here did not power Fukushima. It went to Tokyo, 250 kilometers south. That was always the arrangement. A rural prefecture hosts the plant and takes the jobs and the subsidies, and the capital takes the current. Construction began in 1967. The first unit came online in 1971. For 40 years, it was, for these two towns, simply where people worked. 30 kilometers south, the coast changes again. Iwaki is a city of over 300,000 people. It was outside every evacuation zone. It absorbed evacuees by the tens of thousands, and it kept fishing. Or rather, it tried to. The fleet went to what the industry calls trial operations. Restricted grounds, restricted species, restricted volumes, and every landing tested. Not because the fish were failing the tests, because the fish were passing them, and nobody would buy them anyway. The Japanese word for that damage is fuhyohigai, harm caused by rumor. It is a legal and economic category here, and for the fishing families of the Hamadori, it has been more expensive than the wave. In August of 2023, the first treated water was released into the sea. Water is still being generated at the site every day because groundwater keeps reaching the damaged buildings. It is filtered through a system that removes most radionuclides but cannot remove tritium, which is chemically part of the water molecule itself. The treated water is then diluted and discharged in batches of roughly 7,800 cubic meters under monitoring by the International Atomic Energy Agency. The discharge is expected to continue for at least another 20 years. So far, it has reduced the volume stored on site by about 6%. The fishing cooperatives opposed it. They had been given a written commitment years earlier that nothing would be released without their understanding, and they said clearly that they did not consent. They were not primarily arguing about the science. They were arguing that they had spent 12 years rebuilding a reputation and were about to be handed back the same word again. The releases went ahead. China suspended imports of Japanese seafood entirely. Between the coast and the mountains, other numbers moved the other way. In Kawauchi village, a survey found that around 94.5% of residents had either returned or newly settled. Naraha reopened, and the football training center at J Village, which spent years as the staging ground for plant workers in protective suits, went back to being a football training center. Kawauchi is small and inland, and sat at the edge of the plume. Futaba is not. And so we come to it. Futaba was the last municipality in Japan under a total evacuation order. Every other town got something back. A district, a station, a road with a shop on it. Futaba got nothing for 11.5 years. The whole town, every street, remained closed while the rest of the coast reopened around it in pieces. The train station reopened in March of 2020 with about 1 square mile of habitable land around it. On the 30th of August 2022, the evacuation order was lifted over the reconstruction district. That was the day Futaba was legally a town again.
Nobody lived in it.
The first permanent residents came back in 2022, 3 of them. Walk it now, and it does not look like Chernobyl, whatever you were expecting. There is new public housing west of the station. There is a new town hall east of it. There is a business incubation center with a food court, and inside the food court, there is a sandwich shop called Penguin that used to stand at the station until 2007, brought back deliberately because the people planning the town understood that what draws a person home is not infrastructure, but the taste of something they had when they were 15. There is a mural program, large painted works on the walls of buildings around the station, some of them of the town's own folk crafts. And then, 1 street back, there are the houses. Overgrown yards, roof tiles slid into gutters, furniture still arranged in front rooms behind glass, sofas facing televisions, a calendar on a wall showing March of 2011. Vehicles rusting flat into the ground where they were parked. A nursing home with the beds still made. Nature working steadily through all of it, because nature has had 15 uninterrupted years and no reason to hurry. The official register still lists 5,300 people in 2,300 households. The municipality keeps that list scrupulously because the register is the last formal proof that these families are from here. The number of people actually living in Futaba is around 180, 3.5%. The town's stated plan is to reach 2,000 residents within 5 years. And here is the part that undoes the story most people carry. Outside the Memorial Museum in Futaba, on the 4th of March 2026, the monitoring post read 0.045 microsieverts per hour. That is an ordinary background reading. It is comparable to a great many places on Earth where nobody thinks about radiation at all. You could stand there for a year and receive less than a single medical scan. Futaba is empty, and Futaba is not dangerous, and both of those things are true at the same time, and the gap between them is the whole subject of this film. What emptied Futaba was not the cesium. It was the 11.5 years. 11.5 years is long enough for a mortgage to be paid on a house somewhere else, long enough for a child to start and finish school in another prefecture and make every friend they will keep, long enough for a business to be rebuilt in Saitama, for a parent to grow too old to move, for a marriage to settle around a new commute, long enough for a returning 50-year-old to find that the town they came back to has a shop and a station and a mural, and no neighbors, and no doctor within easy reach, and no one left who remembers their mother. Hisai Unuma farmed cattle 2.5 kilometers from the plant. Her house in Futaba is still standing. She has seen it. She said she was surprised it was still up, and that from where she stood in the living room, she used to be able to see her cattle in the field. And now the view is blocked by bamboo that has grown through what used to be the garden. She grows vegetables in Saitama now. Her husband died there. She has said she will not come back even if they scrape the soil off her fields. What would make her feel safe is the removal of the melted cores from the reactors, and she knows what that timeline looks like. Isuke Takakura also lived in Futaba. He evacuated, found work in Tokyo, and stayed there for years. Then he came back. He said he felt a responsibility to the place he came from. He has rebuilt a local shrine. Both of them are Futaba. Unuma is the overwhelming majority, and Takakura is the small number that makes a town technically alive. And any honest account of this coast has to hold them at the same time and refuse to pick. In 2023, in Nami, Japan, opened a national research institute on land near the zone. Robotics for disaster response, radiation science, renewable energy, agriculture. The logic is that if these towns cannot get their farmers back, they might get researchers, and a town of scientists is still a town. Toyota signed a carbon neutrality agreement with Okuma, Futaba, and Nami. Solar arrays are going up across ground that will not grow food again in this generation, and the prefecture has set itself a target of running entirely on renewable energy by 2041. It is a serious plan. It is also an admission. Nobody builds a research economy for a place they expect the original residents to return to. Inside the reactors, roughly 880 tons of melted fuel remains. In November of 2024, after 3 years of delays, a telescopic device reached into Unit 2 and brought out a sample. 0.7 grams. That was the first material ever retrieved. Full-scale removal from Unit 3, once scheduled for the early 2030s, has been pushed to 2037 at the earliest, which makes the government's stated goal of completing decommissioning by 2051 no longer credible to anyone who works on it. So here is where it actually stands, 15 years on. The prefecture is fine, better than fine. It won the sake medals again. The peaches went out in August. The tree in Miharu flowered in April, and the riders came back in May and rode the field at Hibarigahara in their grandfather's armor. 2.2% of it is a different country. In that 2.2%, the radiation is mostly gone, the gates are mostly open, the money has been spent, the murals are painted, the station is running, and the people did not come. 14 million cubic meters of soil sits in bags, waiting for a permanent home that no prefecture will offer, with a legal deadline in 2045. 880 tons of fuel waits in 3 ruined buildings for machines that have not been invented. And a town of 180 people has a plan to reach 2,000. There is no honest ending to put on that. The wave took 19,782 people in an afternoon, and the 15 years took the towns slowly, quietly, and without anyone deciding to let them go. The boar are indoors. The macaques are breeding. The butterflies have adapted. The zero is walking the terraces. None of that is recovery. It is just what happens to ground when people stop standing on it. Thank you for watching. Until the next journey.